My name is Irene Miguel-Aliaga, and I'm Professor of Genetics and Physiology at Imperial College and Section Chair at the MRC London Institute of Medical Sciences. Welcome to my exp. I think wherever we look in the animals that we look at, and these may be insects, they may be mammals, they may be humans, I think there are widespread sex differences that extend beyond what we may initially consider. So say humans, mammals, most of the research on sex differences has concerned the reproductive systems, obviously, anatomical differences, and to some extent differences in the brain. And this is very controversial research where people look at, brain, human brains, male and female brains different. We look beyond these places and we find evidence for sex differences pretty much everywhere and at multiple levels. So say, for example, the kind of genes a cell expresses, whether it's a cell, whether it's the cells in our intestinal lining, whether it's liver cells, whether it's nerve cells, they will all express different genes in males and females. I think historically, the assumption would be that many of these sex differences are to do with reproduction and reproductive strategies, and that is indeed the case, and that's what we're finding even with our research in the gastrointestinal tract. We find that many of the differences, so we're finding that male and female intestines are different, and many of these differences are indeed to sustain reproductive output. So male and female flies, male and female mice will have different needs reproductive-wise, so nutritional needs, for example, and the gastrointestinal tract will adapt to those nutritional needs to sort of deliver the kind of nutrients that the progeny will require. Now, the question, I guess there's other questions, do these sex differences subserve non-reproductive functions? Are they useful for something else? And that's something that we're beginning to explore. And I think the answer will probably be yes. So I think there's many layers in which we should consider sex differences. So if you go from the probably most simplistic one, which is the cells, right, as kind of arguably smallest functional units, I think we are finding sex differences there. So if we take human embryonic stem cells, we and others, we're not the only ones that have done this, but if we take human embryonic stem cells, we differentiate them, so we make them turn into a particular cell type, and we look at the male ones, so those derived from males and those derived from females, they are different, and we can catalog those differences and we can describe those differences. When these cells come together as tissues, say, an intestinal tube, that tissue is also different. So, there's male guts and there's female guts. And when you consider those differences, so even three-dimensionally or even at the level of the whole organism, those are different too. Now, I think that the tricky bit is to move from individual organisms to communities, and that's where it becomes controversial and where it becomes difficult. Partly because then what we normally describe as culture or nurture, all these things begin to sort of interact with sort of what we have so far only considered biology. I think that dichotomy is kind of a false dichotomy. I mean, I think it's really difficult to separate nature from nurture. I think probably quite a few scientists would be happy with the idea that there are sex differences up to the individual level, and males and females are different in some ways, for example, in the way they reproduce. But equally, most scientists, or quite a few scientists, would like to believe, or would sort of favor the idea that nurture overrides all these sex differences that are biologically sort of determined. I am not sure I agree with that, and to me, it's actually not a particularly relevant discussion either, because I don't see nature and nurture as two separate entities. And in the end, I don't think it's particularly relevant whether males and females are, to establish whether males and females differ and in what way. I think when we reach these kind of societal issues, I think what we need to consider is that equality and diversity are two very different things. So you can have equality while having diversity.